welcome. My name is Christina Kindle, and I'm one of the Grants Management Associates, as well as the chair of the LGBTQ Dialogue Group here at Oregon Community Foundation. And I'm here to welcome Stacey. Stacey Rice is a transgender woman who found her way to Portland from the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina over 9 years ago. She's the former executive co-director of Q Center, the largest LGBTQ community center in the Pacific Northwest. She was recognized by the Gay and Lesbian Archives of the Pacific Northwest as a queer hero for her work there and in the greater Portland community. Stacey presently provides consulting on LGBTQ plus diversity and inclusion with a focus on transgender competency. So I won't take up any more time. Passing it over to you, Stacey.
Oh, Christina, thank you for that very wonderful, warm welcome. Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you today, and all your smiling faces I can see, which is lovely. And really appreciate your interest in this survey and what it's told us about Oregon LGBTQ older adults. So without any further ado, I'll throw this out there as well too at the beginning. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter those in the chat, and we'll be stopping periodically to take questions. Super open to whatever questions you have. So please take the opportunity, if you have some questions as we move along, to put those in the chat, and we'll try to get some answers for you. So, okay, let's get started. Okay. Wow, this amazing survey. So happy that the state of Oregon, let's see, I'm having some troubles here. Wait just a second. Let's see. Let me stop and share again. There we go. See, I was complaining earlier about Mercury retrograde. I think we're still in that. I'm not real sure, but I'm going to blame it on that. Gosh, a little bit over a year ago, the Oregon Aging and People with Disabilities Division decided to do some work in a survey around LGBTQ elders in Oregon. And so they put together an advisory committee about a year ago now, actually, of 17 representatives from all over Oregon, all LGBTQ folks. We also had the University of Washington researchers with us on this committee, along with representatives from the Aging and People with Disabilities Division. And we spent a whole year actually digging into what this survey is going to look like. You know, who do we need to reach out to? We actually went through the questions one by one to kind of give feedback on kind of, you know, what if those are the appropriate and the right questions to be asking LGBTQ elders in Oregon. And the survey came out on September 14th. Of this year, and it actually is the very first comprehensive study and survey of LGBTQ older adults in Oregon. There's maybe been one other state, maybe two, that have done this kind of work. So, so pleased that Oregon took it on to take a look at what my community. I'm a trans woman. I'm 64 years old. As I was telling everybody earlier, I participated in the survey too. So happy that they were getting, working to get feedback and from folks in my community. So happy about that. Let's first start off with just some basics about the LGBTQ community. I mean, you know, people are pretty super educated, I think, about the community, but just wanted to kind of highlight a few things here that you can see that maybe you hadn't thought about. when it comes to the LGBTQ community and our, like I like to call the alphabet because there's a lot of letters in there. Uh, it's all about gender identity and sexual orientation. The T in the alphabet is, I'd say, is the only one of the alphabet that actually exclusively it comes from a place of gender identity. I mean, of course, trans folks can identify several ways when it comes to sexual orientation. But just to give you just a short recap, gender identity really is what a person's deeply held internal sense of their gender is. And sexual orientation is who you're physically, romantically, or emotionally attracted to another person. There was a Gallup survey done this year, actually, and there were some interesting results came out of that. One is that 87% said that they knew someone who was gay or lesbian, but they only knew 31% of the people said they knew someone who was transgender, which is it's kind of symptomatic, I think, of, and I see this all the time in my training that I do around transgender competency. People just don't know what the transgender journey is about, and they hear a lot of horrific things at times about who trans people are. But we have so much more work to do to kind of share what it means to be transgender, what that journey is all about. And I was so happy to see that in this report, in this survey, actually, you could see there is some trans data that popped out that's really interesting. There's actually in the US, they've estimated in this survey that there was actually 5.6% of the US population is LGBTQ plus identified. Trans folks are 0.6% of the population, so it's a smaller population for sure. Oregon, DC leads the way, but we actually have the second highest LGBTQ population in our state. And kind of like myself, who moved from North Carolina, a little bit over, almost 10 years ago now, is that when I first discovered Portland, I couldn't believe the culture. I couldn't believe the acceptance that I could see I was getting as a trans woman. So I picked myself up and I moved, and there's a lot of folks who are doing that in the LGBTQ community. I like to laugh and say that there's a lot of us Southern refugees out here in Oregon, because living in the South as an LGBTQ person is pretty hard at times. So I feel very incredibly blessed actually to be here in Oregon and in Portland. There were several areas that this survey looked at, and you can see them right there in front of you. But it kind of was covering all the bases. I so love the fact too, because this survey was done during COVID, that actually they had questions around the impacts of COVID-19 on the LGBTQ older adult population here in Oregon. So we're going to go through each one of these, and I'm keeping an eye on my time too, because we could probably talk 2 hours about this, but I'm going to get through it so we can get some good information. So let's get started on that. Here you can see who participated in this survey. I think everybody on the committee at the state of Oregon, the researchers, were incredibly thrilled, I guess is the best way to put it, with the amount of participation we had and the diversity of the participation that we had. We ended up with a little bit over 1,400 LGBTQ adults that are aged 55 and older that participated in this survey. You can see the breakdown there. I've got race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender. And as you can see from there, it's a pretty diverse sampling, actually, which is lovely and so great. And there were 83 of the participants were from urban areas. There were 16% that were from rural areas, and there was 1% that were in the frontier areas. Now, I didn't know what frontier area meant until I joined this committee, but what that, and maybe you know about it or maybe not, but I'll share a definition with you. That for a frontier area, that is actually 6 or fewer people per square mile. For a rural area, that means that you're at least 10 miles from a population center. And the distribution of responses was maybe not quite as strong that especially from the rural and frontier areas. So there's probably some more work actually to be done there with that. Okay, let's start off with the access to services. There were some pretty eye-opening things actually that popped up in here. I mean, that first bullet point, 50% of the people said they had unmet service needs. I mean, that was so much higher than I maybe thought it was going to be. And you can see what the top 3 needs are there, those services. But I also want to focus on the barrier of not being LGBTQ plus welcoming. That is a very hard thing for community. We all have experienced discrimination in service environments. I've experienced it with my medical provider. As an LGBTQ person, you have to, you can choose not to, but typically in a lot of service situations, you have to come out to those folks you're talking to, especially if it's a new place that you're going to. You have to share, hey, for me, like for instance, I have to say, well, before we get started, I'm a transgender woman. And because these things, they need to know those things for the services that were being provided. And as you can imagine, that is exhausting. It's so exhausting. And unfortunately, there's lots of instances where we experience discrimination because a service provider is not LGBTQ welcoming. I just did some work with Multnomah County back at the first of the year on their area plan. And it was the first time they wanted to include trans elders in their planning and going forward. And I did a bunch of interviews with lovely trans older folks that, like, I knew a lot of them from Q Center, which during the pandemic was lovely to be able to reconnect with folks that I love dearly. But every one of the folks that I interviewed, when it came to services, said that they would refuse to go to a senior center if it was all just straight or it wasn't LGBTQ welcoming. It's maybe something that most of the population doesn't think about, but the opportunities that there are for discrimination, we need to be in welcoming spaces. We need to be able to see that we look for the little signs too, that a place is welcoming. With it can be anything from, a rainbow flag, a sticker on your name tag, or anything that just kind of gives you some a little bit of hope that those folks are going to be LGBTQ friendly, using your pronouns on your name tag. Those little things really add up, actually. The highest rate of unmet needs, the first one, there's the racial and ethnic minorities. And I just want to share some numbers with you that are so high. Let's start off with Asian and Pacific Islanders. 92% of the participants said that they had unmet needs, service needs. Black and African Americans, 86% said that they had unmet needs. Native Americans, Alaska Natives, 84%. These numbers are so high. Goodness, so much opportunity there for help. To provide help. For Hispanics, it was 60%. There's just one of the lovely things about this survey is that's been done is the fact that it's going to identify places where there needs to be funding, there needs to be services, there needs to be competent services. It's the first time we really had this data, and it's so powerful that we do have that now. Health and well-being. Yeah, most of us said that our quality of life and general health are pretty good, actually. But there were some pockets of where of poor general health that you can see there as well. Um, One number that stood out to me actually was for the transgender adults under the poor general health care. 45% of the trans respondents said they had poor mental health, which is tough and it's hard. Um, the last point about the 1 out of 5 participants experience report past year suicidal thoughts or ideas, and half of Asian and Pacific Islanders did. I think as a member of the LGBTQ community, these numbers probably don't come as much of a surprise, I guess, because the journey's hard. And especially for older LGBTQ adults, they've had to experience decades of being in the closet. I mean, just think about someone who's 80 and their life back in the 50s. I mean, oh my gosh, just trying to survive can be pretty hard and pretty tough. I mean, it's, you have these folks, they were on the front lines of kind of the LGBTQ rights movement, and they've had to go through so much. And so, and then you get to I mean, there's times, and you get to, especially this past year, I think, with the social isolation that occurred. I felt that deeply, actually. I live alone. So in most, and I've got some statistics on that as we get further into this, that so many older LGBTQ adults live alone. And there's opportunities there to try to kind of reduce that isolation. Let's talk about adverse experiences. I've mentioned discrimination. But look at that number there. I mean, 60% of the participants in the last year experienced discrimination. We're in most of those respondents are in Portland, Oregon, and other urban areas. If you break the numbers down a little bit more, 56% of that 60% actually the discrimination was sexual orientation and gender identity related. Age was 42% of that 60%. And if you look at the folks who are the highest risk of discrimination, gay men and transgender adults, for gay men, it was 66% of those respondents that actually experienced discrimination. For trans adults, it was 72%. Which didn't surprise me very much at all, because trans folks tend to have sometimes a little harder path when it comes to the discrimination piece. The experience of trying to decide whether to disclose your sexual or gender identity to service providers is a pretty that situation's fraught with a lot of issues, because if you're, and I've experienced it myself, and thinking, okay, do I tell them who I am? Maybe they need to know who I am. Oh my gosh, how are they going to react? I don't know. I had a health experience one time where it was a brand new clinic that I'd gone to, and it was urgent care clinic, and I hadn't seen my medical record, but I was pretty sure, I didn't know whether it said that I was a trans woman. This was my medical provider, but it was the urgent care piece. And so I'm sitting there in the examination room, just trying to decide, well, gosh, how much do I tell them about this? Are they going to be okay with this? So I did share it with the first person I had interactions with, and they didn't seem too happy actually about that. And they were still professional, but the energy shifted so deeply when I shared with them that I was trans, and that and she left. She never returned. The doctor came. When it was time for another nurse to come in, somebody different came in. So it kind of showed me that, well, everybody wasn't quite on the Stacey trans train here today. So yes, that's just a small example of kind of what you have folks in our community have to deal with and think about. This last point, I was just totally saddened when I saw. I had not a clue that it would be this high, but a quarter of the participants had experienced elder abuse in the last year. Good Lord, that just seems like such a high number to me. And less than a quarter of the quarter, I don't know if that makes sense, actually reported the abuse, mainly because of the distrust of authorities. They were maybe worried about fairness. To break those numbers down just a little bit more, 62% were abused by a stranger. I was expecting that to be like the big number to be family member. No, it's by a stranger. Only 12% with a family member. And out of the, there's 6 in this survey. There were 6 different things associated with elder abuse: physical abuse, verbal abuse, excessive control, financial abuse, and then just caretaker neglect. Verbal abuse was the highest rated percentage out of the elder abuse there. Let's see, I'm wondering, we're about halfway through these points. Let's just stop and see if we've got some chat questions here. Don't be shy. I'm glad, just give me a minute. I'm glancing through here to see if anybody has any questions. Yes, that is a high number. Yes, that is so true. No questions yet, so I'll keep mentioning that. Yes, if you have some questions, feel free to jump right in there. Okay, let's move on. What's happening here now? I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go back out and come back in again. So sorry about that. Let's see. There we go. One of the other sections that was covered was that in the survey was economic and housing stability. And you can see, the federal poverty line, the 200%, below the 200% of the federal poverty line, there were 40% of the participants stated that they lived at or below that. Now compare that to the Oregon state average is 28%. So there's more disparities there. 67% are not confident they'll be able to stay in their current housing. And this particular statistic to me brings up the issue around LGBTQ competency, acceptance in senior housing, assisted living. Gosh, when I worked at Q Center, we had an older adult program there, and there were so many stories from the folks that participated in that program that were living in senior housing and actually had to go back into the closet again because they couldn't be out where they were living. How horrible is that? Here you've got folks that had their whole lives had fought so hard to be true to themselves and who they were. And they get to this point in life where society in a whole is actually getting more accepting of LGBTQ folks. But in some of these senior housing situations, it's just not possible. It really brings up the need to me of just having, well, if there's senior housing providers, they need to become more LGBTQ competent. that they can figure out how to be welcoming to everyone. And there is some of that work's being done, but there's still a ton of that still needs to be done. And also too, just LGBTQ specific housing, senior housing. We were talking about this among staff before the Lunch and Learn started, is that is such a brilliant and beautiful way to provide safety, family, community to LGBTQ adults, especially senior adults, and LGBTQ youth as well too. There's a really cool organization, gosh, I can't remember their name right now, but this is 2 or 3 years ago. They were looking at trying to combine in a housing complex, LGBTQ youth and then LGBTQ elders, which would be an amazing thing to do. I mean, just that mentorship, I think, that could be derived from someone that's lived to be, 55 and older, and as an LGBTQ plus person, and what they've had to go through and how they could share that wisdom and that knowledge with the youth and the younger folks, I just think is such a beautiful thing. So there's a real need for this. And I'm glad that this survey kind of highlighted and all the other statistics as well too. I have my own house, but I mean, just thinking about having to go to assisted living or senior living center is really, I think I would struggle deeply with that. So, well, our good old pal COVID-19, here we are 18 months, I guess, into this. Some of the findings that came out of this was that that the participants were pretty highly vaccinated. And as you get older, and when COVID hit, you started thinking about, okay, as an older person, especially I've had heart issues, so I actually was really doubly worried about it. Is that you as soon as you could get that vaccine, you were going to get it actually, because you knew that was going to help. And as I mentioned earlier, that, just the social isolation that all of us actually experienced during the pandemic, I think was kind of like a double whammy for the LGBTQ older adults. I mean, LGBTQ folks, and it was you could see this in the data here too, that we're more likely to live alone. I mean, we're less likely to be married or have a partner. Like I said earlier, I live alone. I don't have a partner. So the mental health struggles that popped up, at least during this time for me, was something I wasn't expecting because of that isolation. And that I couldn't be out, participating in programs that elders mostly participate in. They couldn't go to Hollywood Senior Center. They couldn't do those kind of things. I know there was some really wonderful work being done by my dear friend Paul Arabino on doing virtual Zoom, senior centers. I mean, for like a limited number of people, but just so older LGBTQ adults could have family and connection. And some of the participants in his program have just they were so thankful that they had that every week to look forward to. So COVID is going away. I'm going to knock on wood. You may be able to hear it one of these days, but I feel like the social isolation piece is still going to be there, in that there's great potential to help seniors, the LGBTQ older adults, deal with that isolation. And I'm sure there's lots of different ways that can be thought of to do that. But there needs to be, I think, a focus on that to get and especially in the rural and frontier areas. I mean, my goodness, how incredibly difficult is it even just to find community there, much less, access an easily accessible program or service. So there's lots of things to think about when it comes to that social isolation piece of this. If you know anybody that's LGBTQ, you probably know that my community is a pretty resilient bunch. As we mentioned earlier, all of the LGBTQ community, even today, I mean, it's still a struggle at times today. You battle through so much just to be true to who you really are. And I mean, I like to say that I like to think too that LGBTQ people are some of the most courageous people that I know, because I mean, you risk everything to be true to your heart and who you are. I don't know if a lot of people do that, I mean, how many people do you know that are actually true to who they really are? Well, the LGBTQ community is a lovely example of that. I mean, just look at that number. 72% report they bounce back quickly. Well, yeah, you take a lot of hits as you're coming out, after you come out, before you come out, and yeah, it's pretty resilient bunch actually. I love this number too about the 80% report helping others in community. Of course, that's our family. That's our chosen family. I mean, we know what we've gone through, and we know that it's a very innate sense, I think, actually, that you need to help. You need to help try to make someone else's journey easier because of what you've gone through. And yeah, we can always count on each other. That's for sure. I mean, I want to say this though. I mean, there is some disagreements in the LGBTQ plus community, the alphabet. I mean, it's not like kumbaya among everybody in the alphabet, but we do have a bigger, a larger purpose, I guess, in the fact that of where we come from and how we identify. This was the 25% that didn't have access to reliable high-speed internet, and like 40% of gay men didn't have adequate internet access. All I could think of was just how incredibly difficult was that during this past 18 months. I mean, the only way that you could connect was virtually. So there's an opportunity there for, I'm not real sure what all that would look like, but there's a real opportunity there to work on that particular thing, actually. So, okay, let's see. I think we've gone through the main points. Let me stop in at the chat again, and let's just see. Okay, here we go. There's some questions here. Thank you very much for those. How will the needs identified be addressed? Are there some concrete steps identified? This is a great question. I mean, is the gay men's access to internet as opposed to lesbians and others? I find that odd, given the gay men often benefit economically from men's increased power in our society. Great point. That is a wonderful point, and that's a very true point. It is actually, it was among all the different groups that like the gay, lesbian, gender, well, I said that already, race and ethnicity, HIV status, geographic region, socioeconomic status. Yes, they came out at that high number, and I'm puzzled by that as well too. When I first saw that, and as I was putting together this presentation, I thought, and so I so appreciate you asking this question, because I said, I don't know if I've got an answer to it, because I was thinking about that. It is odd. I'm just, I don't know what the impact of maybe rural and the frontier areas maybe had on that number. I mean, and I don't know if I could really even say that I've seen anything in the report that kind of explains that deeper. So, yeah, I'm with you. I find it odd too, but I'm so sorry I don't have a real good answer for you, actually. Okay, we got some other questions here. Yeah, must have something to do with who answered the survey. Yep, yep, sure could be. So, okay, let's see. Is there any others? Thank you for those questions. Really appreciate that very much. Keep adding them in there whenever you feel like you want to ask a question. Now, let's see if I'm realizing that every time. Okay, let's go. Thank you all for your patience so much. Okay, let's get back to this. Oh gosh. Well, you think I'd be experienced at this by now, but okay, there we go. Goodness gracious. Okay, let's talk about some conclusions. I think there's probably some other, I don't want to say minor conclusions, but there's some other conclusions that were found in this survey, but I felt like these were probably four of the more important ones that came out of the survey. Yes, LGBTQ older adults are underserved. I mean, just you think back to the services section and kind of those incredibly high rates for people of color trying to access services. Yeah, so it's which is a good thing to know that we are an underserved population. Talked about this just a little while ago about the social isolation that needs to be reduced. The cultural inclusivity training, I mean, is such a big thing. I mean, I think that we're pretty lucky in Portland that that there's a lot of that work that's happening and has been happening and will continue to happen. But there's so much other opportunity outside of Portland for this work to be done. I mean, LGBTQ communities everywhere, not just in Portland, we're everywhere. So that needs to be focused on as well too. And then those pockets of risk that we've talked about off and on through this presentation. Yes, but that's what this survey has helped, as we just spoke about, that it's helped identify, where those pockets are, and then we can start focusing funding programs, those kind of things to address those. Okay, how can you support LGBTQ plus elders? We need the support. As you saw back from the very beginning, there's a lot more straight folks out there than there are LGBTQ folks in the world. So we need your help. Listening to the voices of peoples whose lives are LGBTQ plus, incorporating those voices into the work, into planning, into providing. I mean, how wonderful an experience it is as a trans person to walk into a service provider and see a trans person there. It's the first person that you are greeted by. I mean, it's just things as simple as that, actually. But because that's a voice that's there, they've hired diverse voices that can provide that welcome that people are looking for. About forming partnerships, is keeping your eye on that. I mean, as you start looking at how to include people, including everyone, making sure everyone is there around the table and that's included. In LGBTQ organizations and communities, there is some prioritization of needs of older adults. I mean, but I would say probably not a lot. I mean, we all kind of get lumped together, I think, in what our needs are, but there are specific needs for older adults that younger LGBTQ plus adults are not going to have. So I know that that senior program I referenced earlier at Q Center it was more social based, with doing things like chair yoga, and like there were writing groups, they put on a play. I mean, just all these amazing things that gave a lot of those older adults community there at Q Center. And actually, I mean, there's one of the dear women that had actually had to go back into the closet in her living situation. And she would share the story over and over how that saved her life, that she found the ERA program at Q Center, that she could be there. It was every day of the week except for the weekend. So it's important. It's really important to provide space for older adults. It's important to the senior central opportunities that people have to go to. They need to be welcoming to LGBTQ older adults as well. Yes, from the government standpoint, I mean, participating in, the planning processes to get the resources actually to support what this survey has shown are the needs and what needs to be done. Like I say, the financial support for new existing programs and policy development, implementation, which, I have I have an incredibly soft, I was telling everyone earlier before the thing started, how much of a soft spot I have in my heart for OCF, because you funded Q Center in such a lovely way and have for a long time. And without you all's work and support and funding, we couldn't have done what we did there, and that is still going on actually there. So yes, this last bullet points for the foundations, for the donors, to find a place, especially as a donor, I think, I mean, to find a place where, something out of this survey or the journey of LGBTQ older adults, is close to your heart. I mean, you feel it. You feel like you want to help with this community. I mean, yes, please do. I mean, it's there's just so many opportunities. I mean, I feel like the LGBTQ community, we need all the help we can get funding wise. I mean, a lot of and you all know this as well as I do, but I mean, so many of the LGBTQ organizations are just small organizations. They're not huge. They're just small, and they need all the help they can get funding wise, especially if you're looking at adding a new program or expanding an existing program. So yes, thank you all so much for all you do and all you fund statewide. And it feels like there's some real opportunities there for you all to work with the rural and frontier areas. I mean, I know you all are already there and doing a lot of work there already. But when it comes to this particular section of community, and maybe even the overall LGBTQ community, yeah, your help would be so deeply appreciated, actually. So, okay, let's see. Well, we're doing pretty good. I hope I didn't rush through this too much. We're doing pretty good time-wise. I didn't want us to get to the end and we have 10 slides left. Let's see. Looks like we may have some more questions in the chat here. And some comments too. Yeah, there are many places here that have no internet service. I love this. It's not automatically about money, it's about mountains. Yes, that can block the internet service, exactly. And yes, so I don't see any other questions. So feel free to add another one or two if you want. Okay, here we go. Heidi's got one. Did the report explore LGBTQ plus older adults with disabilities at all? Yes, it did. There was a section in the survey for folks that experience disabilities. And you can find that in the overall report. It's broken down pretty well there. So I didn't have any of that in the presentation today, but yes, they did. There were questions around that. Oh, is there any calling for a West Side area for older LGBTQ? I'm guessing that you West Side of Portland or West Side of Oregon. um, I could let me assume. Oh, Beaverton, yes. You know, there is a calling. I mean, I've just in the last 2 or 3 years. Beaverton and Hillsborough both have been doing, the city of Hillsborough, city of Beaverton have been doing more trying to find ways to support the LGBTQ community on the west side. I mean, because as you know, I mean, who wants to drive through the tunnel every day or to come to something? I mean, it's a real thing. I live in St. John's. I have a dear friend in Aloha, so I go over Forest Park, but that's still a nightmare at times. So yes, I mean, there should be, these are large cities, there should be services there. So I do know that that no, not older adult specific services yet in the West Side, but there are there's a kind of modeled after Q Center actually in Hillsborough, which is like a community center that's just started a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago. So yes, it's happening. Hopefully this data will show that there needs to be more work done actually there. So thank you for that question. Thanks to everyone for your questions. Appreciate it. Are there any organizations serving LGBTQ plus, especially LGBTQ elders in rural communities? Of course, Basic Rights Oregon, that's here in Portland, they're a statewide organization, more policy, political based, actually, is the kind of work that they do. You know, I struggle with this at my time at Q Center because we were trying to find ways to reach out to other LGBTQ communities in Oregon outside of the metro area. And there's just not like a lot out there. I mean, one of the beautiful things about Oregon to me, even though we have rural area here, I mean, rural Oregon versus rural South is somewhat different, but in some ways. But the fact that we have like an incredible number of pride celebrations now, like in Ashland, like Yachats of all places, which I love my little Yachats. Newport, Hood River. Oh my gosh, I'm missing some others because there were some other really small town or two were doing a pride celebration in June. And but as far as I know, I don't really know of any, like a lot of, oh, Fall City, Roseburg, yes. I love that so much. Thank you for adding those. Yes, what an incredibly beautiful and wonderful thing that is. Well, I just think it shows maybe, I guess, too, just that need that for community-based services, whether it's a community center or whatever, and in areas outside of just where we are. I mean, Astoria has a really amazing community center, and they're doing incredible work there. Of course, Eugene has some amazing organizations that that LGBTQ folks can. I don't think they've got a community center, but there's a pretty active trans group there too as well. I'm trying to think where else. Corvallis, maybe. Oh, how could I forget Bend? I mean, Ben has a super engaged LGBTQ community there. Not so much focused on elder work that I know of, but yeah, I've done their pride a few times there, so they've got a pretty large community there. So, okay, I hope that answered your question. Let's see. Oh, okay. Oh, emerging group in Lakeview, Lake County. I feel like I'm on a telethon or something. Okay, keep bringing those to me. Let's see. Let's keep, you're making my heart overflow this afternoon. So thank you for that. That looks like that's all the questions that we have, and we're ending just a little short, but it's been an incredible pleasure to be with you today. Thank you to you all for having me, for organizing this, and providing the space for this conversation. If you let me go, if you want, well, I'd have to go back out of this again. But if you have any further questions or want to reach out to me, please feel free to email me. My email is Stacey, Stacey, at staceyrice.com. You can also go to my website at staceyrice.com. I'm into all kinds of different things, as you'll see on the website. But yes, please feel free to reach out if you have further questions, or if I can help you with anything, I would be more than happy to do that. So I guess with that, Christina, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stacey. Thank you for sharing this report. The link is in the chat. We can drop that link in again if you want to take a closer look at the executive summary of this report. Thank you all for being here and for engaging with us here. We'll have the recording available as well if you want to come back and visit or share with folks who weren't able to make it today.